Look, we're in a very unique market. Now, you guys are lucky, right? You're in a market that rarely goes down because Boulder's between growth caps and everything else that's been in Boulder County for so long. Home prices rarely decline, but it's still a tough market when you have 8% mortgage rates, and I get it. That's a difficult market for all of us, and it really requires perseverance. And I'm also going to tell you, I think it's going to be a hard winter. I think this winter will be the hardest winter we've seen probably since the beginning of the Great Recession in '08. And we've had very few times like this when it's been a combination of low inventory and ridiculously high interest rates that are frankly the fault of this man, Powell. And look, I've worked with the Federal Reserve for a couple decades. I've had dinner with Bernanke. I know Janet Yellen, who's now at Treasury. She was the head of the Fed when Obama was president. Powell's a smart guy, but he's not an economist. He's a lawyer, and he has overcorrected. And I will just tell you that he has overcorrected with quantitative tightening, this rising of interest rates, and it's costing homeowners. If there's one directly impacted target as a result of the Fed's actions, it's home ownership. Sure, a lot of other sectors are getting hit. Everything from banks, which now have negative basis risk, which is a problem. That's what took down Silicon Valley Bank and the two others. But the biggest core impact here is to home ownership. And what Powell and the Fed have done is they're dashing the hopes and aspirations of first-time home buyers. It's not wealthy Americans. Wealthy home buyers, they may not like 8% rates, but they can afford them. Well, they'll just pay cash to buy their home. They're certainly not hitting property investors. What they're crushing here are the hopes and dreams and aspirations of first-time home buyers who are already stretching to get the down payment together and get their debt-to-income ratio in the low 40s at the highest. And so that's the challenge. It's why, if you look at the right here, NAR, the Independent Community Bankers Association, and a group called the Community Home Lenders Association wrote a joint letter to the White House, copying in the Fed and the Treasury Department, calling for the Fed to narrow the spread. Now, I'm going to talk about spreads a little bit today. I'm going to walk you through some technical things about why rates are going to come down, because they are. They're going to come down quick enough for you, but by next spring, we're going to have lower interest rates. I can assure you of that. But a lot of things are freaking us out. Like, we see a really good Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs report in September, and everybody thinks that means the Fed's going to tighten rates further, when in reality, I just want you to focus on the bottom part of this spreadsheet, because it sort of explains what happened where all the employment was. But 151,000 of the over 300,000 jobs that were created were part-time, kind of the Uber class of employment in this country. 123,000 of the jobs created were multiple job holders. We currently have 500,000 Americans working with more than two full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. And so, the growth in employment was not in the income categories that are inflationary. These were service employees. A lot of it was related to the hotel hospitality industry. So, that's where the jobs were created. We don't have a hot economy. We have an economy that's slowing very dramatically. But what I want to highlight to you is, this is technical. Don't worry about it. I want you to erase it from your memory after I tell you. But I want to explain to you why this is so unique and what's going to happen with rates. So this is a look at the federal funds rate against the 10-year Treasury. And only 5 times in the last 40 years, 4 decades, have we seen the federal funds rate, have we seen the federal funds rate higher than the 10-year Treasury? Now think about it, right? Because the federal funds rate is an overnight borrowing rate from the Fed that big banks use. The 10-year Treasury is a 10-year locked-in interest rate. It should be higher than the Fed funds rate significantly most of the time. It's inverted right now if you look at the far right. And only 5 other times has that happened in the last 4 decades. Whether it was the dot-com boom in the early 2000s, just pre-Great Recession, The COVID pandemic, it went inverted, and we're the most inverted now. Now, the reason why that's important is when the long interest rate market is lower than the short market, it tells you that Wall Street and international bond traders know rates are coming down. And we've seen it. So just watch what happens next. This is that same picture. It's a Fed funds rate with the 10-year Treasury note showing those four inverted periods in this case. Going back to 1990, we have the fifth, it's not circled in red, so that's the fifth inverted on the far right. The green, sort of greenish olive line is mortgage rates. And all I want you to see is what happens to rates after every period of where the Fed fund inverts against the 10-year like we are at today. They drop dramatically, right? We see in the early 90s, they dropped from 11 to 7.5. And the oil patch crisis, not the oil patch, the dot-com crisis of the early 2000s, they dropped from 8.5 to 5.5. It just post-Great Recession, they dropped from 7 to 4.5 after the inversion period. After the COVID pandemic, we were already low because the Fed was stepping in, just barely. I'm not going to explain what was going on technically for you, but interest rates improved. So what's going to happen next? Rates are going to come down, and they're going to come down a lot more than they did just in 2020. They're going to come down more significantly. Most economists predict that by the end of next year, we'll have rates solidly in the fives, and the following year, in 2025, we'll have rates leveling off somewhere in the mid fours. So that's good news. I'm not saying anybody should wait for low rates, right? You rent the rate. You buy the home of your dreams. You rent your interest rate, man. You can refinance it. Do a temporary buy down. CMG can help you with a 1.0 buy down or any variety of options there. Get them into a payment that's comfortable for them, and then just refinance it when rates come lower, because they are going lower. It's not just me saying it. It's literally every economist in the marketplace is talking about this. Let me give you one other example. This is the history of the federal funds rate. This is from Fred. Fred is the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. It's part of the Board of Governors. It's their data source. I use Fred for all sorts of stuff. You're going to see a couple of their charts here today. But this is the history of the Fed funds rate. That's the thing that Powell and the Federal Board of Governors are raising, as you can see over on the far right. This is going back to 1950. And all I want you to see, by the way, those vertical gray lines, those are recessions. So we've had 10 recessions going back to 1950. But I want you to notice one thing. Every time the Fed starts raising rates, it's always happening right before a recession. Why? Because the Fed doesn't overcorrect occasionally. They have never gotten it right. They have never, ever historically gotten it right. We have data here going back to 1950, right? It's 2023. It's over 70 years of data. And it shows that before every one of those gray lines, the Fed's in a period of quantitative tightening, just like we're seeing today. They overshoot, just like the Fed has done, I assure you. We go into recession, which is what we are going to do. It'll be a shallow one, but we will have a recession. And then rates drop because the Fed has to suddenly start dropping rates. And I expect the Fed will cut rates twice next year. So I'm not saying rates are going to drop out of some kind of makeup scheme or just because I want you to feel good. I'm saying it because the technical data assures you that rates are going to drop. They're going to drop soon. The Fed's already done tightening. I'm totally confident of that. They're finished. The economy is slowing pretty dramatically. That's going to be shown even more over the winter. The jobs being created are low-wage income jobs. Average American, by the way, in America over the last 3 years has lost an hour of work a month. I'm not going to explain all that other than to say that's costing about $2 million a month in wages across the country. But in the end of the day, this is just a really absolute certainty that after every time the Fed tightens, they always overcorrect, rates drop, and we're about to see that again. The inverted curve tells you that. This tells you that. And two other things I'm just going to share with you. And I'm only showing this because when people say rates are going to come down, it's not like a made up mood that they're in. This is another slide from Fred, the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. All this shows is the spread between the 10-year Treasury and the 2-year Treasury. Now, the 10-2 spread is something we talk about all the time. I ran the single family business at Freddie Mac for a decade, and all I did is live on Wall Street basically, and we made markets in the hundreds of billions of dollars every month. And we would look at various spreads, but the 10-2 spread was really important because it should be positive. It should be above the black line, meaning a 10-year Treasury should pay more than a 2-year Treasury, right? If you go to the bank today and they offer you a CD as an investment to put your money in, you get a 6-month or 2-year, for example, you should get paid more for the longer term, right? That's the same with Treasuries. But if you look at the far right, they're inverted. They're negative. The 10-year is actually paying more than a 2-year Treasury. The 2-year Treasury is paying more than the 10-year Treasury. The short rate's paying longer than the long rate. Why? Because investors know the long yield is heading down and they're flocking to the 10-year as a result to lock in what they can. And that's creating more demand, less supply, and it drives the yield difference. It drives yields down and prices up. I'm not going to walk you through all that, but we look at that spread. The other one we look at is the 30-year mortgage spread versus the 10-year Treasury. And the reason why that's important is 30-year mortgages traditionally run about 1.5% over the 10-year Treasury throughout history. You see the blue line is mortgages. The red line is the 10-year Treasury. And this goes back to 2010. And so, it's a good it's a good 13 years here. But if you see that little red vertical line I drew in the middle, that's about 1.5%. That's the usual spread between a 10-year Treasury and a 30-year mortgage. Today, mortgages are 300 basis points wide over the 10-year, meaning if things were normal, rates would drop today by at least 1%. Closer to 1.3% would be where they would drop based on the abnormal spread today. So one of the things that's driving your rates up to 8 when they should be at 7 is this ridiculously wide spread. Now, I'm not going to explain the why. If you want to do it, if there's time for questions, I'll explain it to you. But suffice to say, we all know because of these variables, rates are coming down because of the inverted Fed the Fed to 10-year that's only happened 5 times in the last 4 decades, because of the inverted 210 spread, because of the wide 30-year 10 spread. These are all just says rates are coming down. Every economist is saying it. I promise you, you'll find out hard-pressed. Lawrence Young, the National Association of Realtors, is saying rates will come down next year. So that's where we are. And this is why, as I said earlier, we have 2 different letters that have gone to the various federal officials in the last week. The one on the top left is the Home Builders, the Mortgage Bankers Association in Washington, which I was the CEO of for a decade, and the National Association of Realtors. They sent this letter last week on the 9th, and then on Friday, the 12th, or Thursday, the 12th, another letter went to Brainerd and Yellen, really covering the White House, the National Economic Council, and that was sent by the Community Home Lenders of America, NAR again, and the ICBA, both calling on regulators to narrow this spread because they can do it. And it's all explained how to do it in the letters. I won't bore you with that now, but there's so much pressure politically on getting the spread back to normal and getting rates down in an election year. I am absolutely certain, having worked for President Obama in a tough economy and been in the White House on a daily basis, that the guys at the National Economic Council, Lael Brainerd and others, are all looking at this very carefully. On the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, there are 2 guys, Austin Goolsbee, who just joined the Fed board, and Raphael Bostic, who's the Atlanta Fed governor. They both worked with me in the Obama administration. They're sensitive to the political dynamics. Rates are coming down. All right? So let's stop there. Let's shift. Let's talk about what's going to happen with housing in America, because the rumors are worse than the reality by a long stretch. And I just want to talk about this for a second. NPR did a really great piece back in January on how buying a home became a key way to build wealth in America. It is the only way to build wealth in this country. And what I loved about this is the statement below: mortgage rates above 7%, which is where they were back then in the beginning part of the year, and a low supply of homes for sale has made home ownership feel out of reach for many Americans. You guys know this. You're living in a tight supply state and a very tight supply area. Yet it remains an important way to build wealth in the US. So let me show you a couple of data points as to why this is such an important piece for Americans to think about. This is from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. They do this survey every few years. The last time it was done was 2019. But it shows the median net worth for all Americans at various income brackets. This is one version of it, based on the housing component of their net worth. The housing component is that orange section. So wealthy Americans, which is categorized as over 192,000, but remember, it takes you up to multi-billionaires, right? It's everybody over 192. Yes, they have net worth in other businesses. They're more invested in the stock market than any other portion of America. But home ownership is still a big portion of their net wealth, right? Their net worth. But when you get below that and look at every income category in the United States, the single biggest driver to wealth creation in the US is home ownership. That's the orange portion. You see it in the boxes, right? For the 192,000, the median net worth for all owners of homes in America is $500,000 versus renters at 100,000. 74,000 to 127. Owners are 261, renters at 34,000. The basic gist of this is on a macro level, homeowners have about 10 times the median net worth of renters. This is that same study. I pulled this off the Consumer Finances, Survey of Consumer Finances website, which is part of the Federal Reserve website. And I just queried by two factors. I put in median net worth, and then the other drop box I put by housing status. The green line below is the median net worth of all Americans going back to 1989 from 2019. That's 2 decades. That's the median net worth for all renters on average across the country. The turquoise, or whatever you call that color above it, the bluish green, that's the median net worth for homeowners in this country over a 2-decade period, which includes the Great Recession. It doesn't really matter about real estate. The answer here is, if you can get into a home, get into one now. It's why President Biden announced yesterday a very thorough housing policy to improve home ownership rates in this country. Now, can he do it with 8% rates? I don't think so. But can they do it over time when rates come down next year? Yes, they could certainly have an impact. And it talks about building more smaller homes, manufactured homes, incentives for home builders to build entry-level homes, those kinds of things that are going to be coming out of this package. But it's a focus on housing. One last look for you guys. This is the median sales price of all homes sold in the United States. This is, again, from the Federal Reserve, that FRED data source from the Federal Reserve. This goes back to 1960. It's the median sales price of all homes sold in the United States. And you see those gray bars, right? We had 3, 6, 8 recessions during that period of time. And despite all those recessions, the only thing this tells you is get a home. I don't care where rates are. I don't care if we're on the forefront of a recession or after a recession. It does not matter. The problem is that the population is growing faster than the available supply of houses in the United States. And we're not building enough houses to match supply. And people will say, yeah, Dave, but the birth rate's slowing. Yeah, right. The birth rate's slowing, but the population is now 350 million Americans. When I graduated Colorado in 1980, we had about 220 million Americans. So you can have a slower birth rate, but it's a bigger denominator, and all that means is you're still putting out much more population than you did over any decade previously, despite slowing birth rates. We cannot supply enough homes to house every American, and that's why home prices never go down. So any potential home buyer of yours that says, I'm going to wait, what are you waiting for? The ludicrousness of saying, I'm going to wait, that you think you're somehow smarter than the market. The market is based on supply and demand. Let's talk about this whole context. This is the Case-Shiller History of Single-Family Home Price Appreciation or Depreciation in the United States going back to 1942. 1942. By the way, even in the oil patch crisis, which we all remember well in the early 80s in Denver, because we had Chevron right on Colorado in downtown Denver, home prices still appreciated, even with 16% interest rates. Look at the only time, this is the Case-Shiller Index, where home prices have gone down. We have 6 years from 1942 to 2022 where home prices declined. And the worst of them, yes, was the Great Recession, the worst recession since the Great Depression of 1929. But even despite that, if you look at those down years, I want you to look at the 5 years before that. The 2002 to 2006 period, 10, 10, 14, 14. Go back to 1943, 11, 17, 12, 24, 21. Look at the most recent years, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. The appreciating years blow through any context, even when you take into account the few years, 6 out of the decade since 1942, 80 years of history of home values in this country. Your home buyer who says, I'm sitting on the sidelines waiting, are they that smart? No, they can't be. And let me just talk about supply and demand. This is from Dr. Mark Zandi. He's the chief economist for Moody's Analytics. Moody's is the biggest ratings agency in the world. They rate sovereign debt, meaning the debt of all sorts of westernized democracies, corporate debt, munis, they rate the United States government. Zandi is without question the most renowned economist in the United States right now. He's constantly testifying in Washington. Very good friend, fortunately. He just presented this to the FDIC in Washington 3 weeks ago. This is one slide out of 50 pages, but he shows housing supply is seriously undersupplied. That's the headline. So what he looked at is he shows all homes for sale and for rent. So any home that someone could live in, whether they're going to buy or rent in the United States today, going back to 1965. And all this shows us is months available supply. All this shows is we haven't had this lowest supply of homes in the United States since the 1980s. That's when I bought my first home, by the way. And I assumed a 12.5% interest rate. Bought my home from Ken Gum from Remax Southwest in Denver. And I'll never forget it because I bought it no money down, FHA assumable, 12.5%. I sold it and made money and bought my next home 10%. And then at forevermore, it kept going down from there. Buying real estate at any time in the market is the best thing you can do. If we bought them then when rates were 16 or 15 or 12.5 on an assumable, and people now are balking at 8 with no supply, the insanity of that lack of logic blows me away. Seriously, look at the line, the statement underneath the blue line, which shows the total volume. The housing shortfall is 1.6 million homes right now, 700,000 for sale, 900,000 for rent. I'm not going to explain equilibrium vacancy rates, but that's where we are at right now. Supply and demand, if you took econ from Professor Zubro at the University of Colorado, like I did, the first theorem you learn in economics and microeconomics is supply and demand, because off of that comes all of your elasticity variables and everything else you learn in econ. That's the core variable. This is supply, guys. This is supply, and the existing supply is extraordinarily low right now and only being aided by the rates, because a lot of Americans with 8% mortgages don't want to, with 3% mortgages, don't want to sell their home and move into an 8% mortgage. And so, trust me, that pent-up desire to sell is going to only build up a lot more coming inventory over the next couple of years. Likewise is the pent-up desire to buy, because we have this entire wave of millennials waiting to come into the market. Don't worry, I'm getting there. I'm rounding the final corner here. So what about new construction? So this is every unit of real estate that's been built in the United States in decade-long cohorts going back to 1930, all right? And so let me just explain what this is. This is any kind of housing stock being built during these periods of time. The dark blue sections at the bottom are single family detached. The little orange sections above them are attached single unit, that's condo. The gray is 2 to 4 unit rental or owner occupied. The orange section above that are 5 to 20 apartment buildings. The blue section on the top are 20 units and more, larger apartment complexes. And then the green is manufactured housing, okay? That's everything that's built for someone to live in, whether they're gonna rent or own. The only thing I want you to realize is between 1970 and 2009, we were building between 1.6 and 1.9 million homes per year. Per year. Over a decade-long period, that meant 15 million to 16 million homes during those decades. If you look at 2010 to 2019, it dwarfed. Why? Because we had the Great Recession, and we didn't build for half a decade, literally, as you guys know. We stopped building inventory for a period of time there because we had excess inventory going into the Great Recession. And then this decade so far is extraordinarily tight. We haven't seen development this low since the World War II period in the 1940s, when we stopped building homes altogether because we were using all resources to fight a global war. Why is it low now? Well, it's early into the decade and we had COVID. Good news is housing starts are kicking up. Who knows where we'll end by the end of the decade? But it shows you that at least for the last decade, from 2010 to now, we are well below any kind of standard for helping to aid and abet resale supply to build homes for this massive population demand. Supply and demand. Okay, so just bear with me. What have we covered so far? Rates are coming down. I gave you a whole bunch of technical gibberish, but I just wanted you to see it because that's what we who have lived our lives making markets, selling hundreds of billions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities on an annual basis. That's what we look at. Rates are coming down. 2, home prices never come down. They don't. They just don't come down. We showed you that with the median sales price of homes going back for decades. 3, single-family home ownership is a single source of wealth creation, particularly inherited wealth in the United States. And that the only answer is get in, buy a home as soon as you can, as early as you can, because that's the most critical feature. 4, markets are based on supply and demand, and supply is horrendously low. We haven't seen it this low since the early 1980s. And that stock got low because anybody remembers back there, the builders stopped. Remember, we lost a lot of builders. We had the savings and loan crisis and then the oil patch crisis. And a lot of builders went under. In Denver, that's where I was doing my business. And none of you are old enough to remember, Tom may remember, we used to write forward letters to builders. We write 6-month or 1-year commitments for lending just so they knew they had mortgages to put on their properties. It was a very different time back then. So then let's go to demand, right? We showed you supply. Let's talk about demand. This is from the Public Policy Institute. They're a big think tank in Washington. This is the distribution of all Americans in the United States by the US Census Bureau by age. Okay, so from 0 to 100 plus. The headline, millions of potential home buyers will age into their prime home buying age in coming years to come. This is part of a really long presentation given to a bunch of policy analysts in Washington, D.C. about 6 months ago. But all I want you to see is this is the distribution of Americans. The orange section is the important section. On the right side, that call out says the median age for first-time home buyers is age 34. That's not speculative. The New York Federal Reserve publishes a newsletter every month. They have for decades. And one of the data points they share is the median age for first-time home buyers. Everybody uses that age in all their research. Lawrence Young does it for NAR. The home builders use it. The MBA uses it. Fannie Freddie uses it. Everybody. Median age for all home buyers in America is age 34. Look where you guys are right now. Look at age 34-year-olds in this country going to the left down to the mid-20s. This is the biggest wave of home buying demand ever to hit the doorsteps of the real estate industry in the history of the United States. Now, I'm not inflaming anything here. This is fact. You, as realtors, are sitting on the front doorstep of the biggest wave of buying demand ever to hit this country. This is the millennials who are finally rolling into their peak age for home buying, and it's the biggest cohorts of Americans that exist in the country today. Look at it. The only thing closest to it are the baby boomers out in their mid 50s to late 50s, early 60s. I'm a baby boomer, excuse me. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1957. I was the biggest line of population in the country, meaning the biggest cohort of the baby boom generation was 1957, coincidentally. That was a big generation, the baby boom generation. It was the biggest generation in American history. It's what drove the real estate market in this country and in Colorado, beginning in the early 80s when we began buying homes, all the way for the next several decades. Because this generation, this orange section of millennials, is going to be just like the baby boomers were. Remember, the person you sell a home to today, they're not going to buy just one home. I'm 66 years old. I'm a baby boomer. We've bought 14 homes in our life, my wife and I. We've owned homes all around the United States because we moved with our company with the bank I worked for. We've owned 6 homes in the Washington, D.C. area, which is where we live right now. We have a second home, and we've had other second homes. That's what you're going to do to this population. This wave of demand, the biggest ever to hit America in history, is where you sit right now on the front doorsteps. This is your career. This is what's going to make you successful over the long haul. And the good news, a lot of realtors are leaving the business right now because they're scared to death. They don't think they can make it. Rates are high. A lot of realtors came in 2020 because rates went down to 2.25 and everybody wanted a home. They thought it was an easy business to be had, and they found out it's real work. And so you guys, particularly as RE/MAX agents, because you know you're better than the average real estate agent, you're the professionals that are going to stand out here and benefit. And by the way, it's not good planning. It's just pure luck for you. It literally is pure luck for you, for loan officers, for settlement service providers, and everybody else. You just have really great timing. This is where you are. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it because the Fed is technically intervening for the short term in the economy. They're screwing it up. It will correct back pretty quickly over the next year. And watch out, gang. The doors are going to blow off. So be prepared. And by the way, if you've got a potential home buyer who thinks they're smarter than the market, take a few of these slides, put a few of them together and make it your own, and get them out there to buy a home. Because if they can get in now, they'll beat the rush. But the rush is coming. Supply and demand, the first core principle of microeconomics that drives the United States economy. It's sitting right here in front of you with data. I'm going to show you the last slide here. This is the same slide I showed you before, that demographic data. It's done by a different economist, Dr. Mike Fratantoni. I hired him at the Mortgage Bankers Association. He's a PhD from Johns Hopkins, a brilliant economist. He looks at it slightly differently. He takes the whole population, shrunk it up a little bit on the left. But he says there are 15 million Americans between the ages of 28 and 38. We've never had that many in such a tight, decades-long age bracket. Never existed before. And the reason why he uses 28 and 38 is simple. Yes, the median age is 34, but some people wait till their late 30s. Some people buy in their late 20s. But this overall decade is the biggest decade of buying. That's a fact. So on the right is the take-home point. If you look at the home ownership rate, median home ownership rate in America by age, going 2 decades, from 2022 back to 2002, the gray line at the bottom, that's the home ownership rate for people in America under age 35. Look what happens the moment you get over age 35 into that yellow section. That's the line above it. The home ownership rate doesn't increase marginally, mildly. It leaps. It leaps through the freaking roof. So I don't care which slide you like. That's a 64% home ownership rate staring at you in the face, rolling right at you right now. And will they be buying into more expensive homes next year? Yep. And the year after that? Yep. But 90% of Americans want to own a home. Far less think it's a good time to buy a home because they don't understand math. They don't understand economics. They don't understand what drives markets. So I'm going to show you real quick, and just bear with me. This is that same economist, Dr. Fratantoni's forecast, and I'll tell you what it says. The top 2 lines underlined are the forecast for units, housing units, sold last year, this year, next year, and the following year. The big number, the 4.2 million, is resales. The smaller number below it is new homes sold. So this is going to be a slow year, much slower than last year, right? Slower on the resale market by 800,000, a little improvement of 60,000 on new homes sold. As we all know, new home builders did a lot more this year than last year. But look as you look out, look to 2025. We're going to have 5 million homes sold, better, just about the same as last year, but another 200,000 or 150,000 more new homes sold in 2025. This is what's coming your way, right? 1.5 million more homes sold. That's what's coming your way. And so this is the crazy part of what's going to happen. The next line below it, those percentages, those are rates. So the rate forecast for next year is 5.5. The rate forecast for 2025 is 5.1. That's not made up data. That's one of the top PhD economists in the United States. And it's based off of all that gobbledygook I shared with you in the beginning, plus a lot more that I didn't share with you. So the news is this. You got to persevere. This is going to be a hard winter. I want you all just to remember, this is going to be a tough winter. Winter is always the slow part of the cycle anyway, unless you're selling homes up in Vail. But for the rest of the marketplace, it's typically the slow cycle. But spring is going to be good. And I want to leave with these following points. One, the Fed's going to miss this. I'm absolutely 100% certain of it. They've overshot it. Two, rent the rate, buy the home. Rates are going to respond to this slowing economy next year. They'll drop, but don't wait for it. Get in now if you can. If you can afford it, right? You got to be able to afford the home. But if you can't afford it and you want to be a home buyer, the logic to waiting is the dumbest logic I could possibly think of in this real estate market today. Third, supply issues are going to remain. They're not always evenly distributed, right? You know this. You know this being, for those who work Boulder County, compared to a lot of other counties right around you, the supply issues are much worse here than they are elsewhere. Although, you know, it's amazing what's happened in Fort Collins and Greeley and Loveland and everywhere else. But this is it. The biggest wave of demand in history remains. It's irrefutable. Logic and data are irrefutable. Supply and demand is irrefutable. Next, there's a huge building up, pent up desire to sell and to buy.
Es que todo es... Y aquí...
I don't know who's talking. I'm sorry. There's a huge pent up desire to sell and to buy. And what do I mean by this? We have the transition rate of real estate right now is in the low single digits. Typically, around 10 to 13% of all homes in America resell every year across the country. And we're far below that because of interest rates. But at some point, you know, that family that had their child during COVID and is still in the 2-bedroom condo, they're gonna finally say, honey, I'm sick of this. We're moving. And they're not going to wait. They don't expect 3. If they get mid-5s or low 6s, they're going to jump. And you're going to start seeing this pent-up desire. Likewise with senior citizens who want to move into that 55-plus community or to some other location. They've been waiting. They're going to bite. And so you're going to see increased listing inventory. Likewise, pent-up desire to buy. Next, the forecast, increasing sales and lower rates. I showed you that in a variety of different ways. And finally, the last 2 points, this industry is not finished right-sizing. Self-selection is continuing both in the lending side and in the real estate agent side. A lot of folks came into the business in 2020 and 2021 thinking this was easy money, and they're now exiting. They may hang their license somewhere, but they certainly won't be active. They'll go back and get full-time jobs. And then finally, there is a tough winter ahead. There's no doubt about it, but the sun will come out tomorrow. And that's kind of the message of the day.